has a copy so she can show you. Because there it is. Someone in the second row bought it, showing the cover. It's called Into the Fringe. At this time, I'd like to introduce this lovely lady from Arkansas who does abduction research, Dr. Karla Turner.
Before I get started, I would like to thank my host and hostess, Monty and Ellen. They've made me feel very welcome, a good Texas welcome, and I miss that. I've been gone from the state now for a little over a year. It was so nice to be home and be among very friendly, very warm, and very intelligent, interesting people, and I know we will be friends for a long time. Thank you. Before I begin, I would like to advise those of you who have children in the audience old enough to understand what we're talking about, that some of this material could be very disturbing, and I would like you to know that in advance. I certainly don't want the responsibility for upsetting children. I've never had an audience with children before, so I've never had to say this. But be forewarned, please, and use your discretion if your child is old enough to comprehend what we're discussing. This is not material for children. My name is Karla Turner. I'm 45 years old, married, with one grown son who's also married. My husband served in the Army as a linguist and a finance specialist for almost a decade, and he's now a computer analyst. My son and daughter-in-law both have master's degrees in physics, and they're employed in the electronics and communication industry. For over a decade, I taught college English at NTSU, or the University of North Texas, as it's now so proud to be known. While I was earning a PhD in English, primarily in Anglo-Saxon studies. My ethnic background is Scottish, English, and Native American. I've traveled widely. I make stained glass windows. I'm a professional writer. I have a good relationship with my family, and I love dogs. In other words, I and my family, I want you to realize, are not very different from you and the people around you. All of us are products of this same world, and we have shared for all these years the same reality. I want to stress this because the things I'm going to discuss this evening may seem too fantastic to be true to many of us. Yet I assure you, and I want to assure you by every test I've been able to make, this material, at least at some very important level, is real. Reality is a question right now, and I've got to tell you that up front. And if these things are real, a part of my reality, my family's reality, and many, many other people's realities, rest assured, whether they've touched you personally or not, they are part of your reality because we share this. I feel confident in saying that the abduction of humans by aliens is a fact of our existence, whatever those aliens may be. I'd like to define a couple of terms, and then I want to share with you a little of what it's like to go through such experiences in the beginning. But more importantly, I want to present some of the data about these alien abductions, which I've gathered working with an excellent researcher, Barbara Barker of Tulsa, Oklahoma, from over 400 cases, which I think is a fairly large number from which we can draw some patterns of data. And this data raises several questions, at least in my mind, that have enormous implications for who we are and the world we live in. First, by alien, I mean creatures which are not humans. And whether these beings are from some other planet, from a different dimension, or from some non-corporeal or spiritual source, I am not making any claims. By abduction, I mean the forcible removal of a person from his normal environment. Now, there are people, and probably people here, who say they've encountered alien beings without being taken anywhere, or who have gone with these beings willingly. That's not what I'm talking about. Forcible removal of a person by non-human beings from the normal environment. And by far, the greater number of the people with whom Barbara and I have worked emphatically say they have not given permission for these abductions to occur. For the most part, these abductees have told us that they wish these encounters had never happened, and that they are alarmed, at least initially, by their experiences. Now, some of them, as I will be pointing out shortly, have suffered physical pain and emotional trauma, disruption of their lives from these abduction encounters. In my own family, my husband Casey, my son, daughter-in-law, stepson, both of my in-laws, my brother, and my sister-in-law, as well as myself, have all had experiences with UFOs and their occupants. Several close friends have also had these encounters. And this isn't unusual, as those of you who are familiar with abduction and search. And how many of you have been reading in the abduction phenomenon? Am I preaching to the choir about the basics? Okay. Then you probably know that there's a clustering effect that seems to occur with the abduction experience. For instance, when a new abduction case or potential abduction case comes to us, one of the very first things we do in the pre-investigation stage is interview close family and friends. And almost, I won't say in every case, but in many, many cases, other potential cases turn up. Now, typically, as you know then from your reading, abductions begin in early childhood and they continue intermittently throughout a person's life. In our cases, my family's cases, this is also true. My husband, for instance, was first abducted at the age of 11 months, believe it or not, while riding in the car with his father in the foothills of the Sierra Mountains in Northern California. The date was Labor Day 1947, so you can do a little quick math and see how close this was to the very famous Kenneth Arnold sightings, also, which took place also along the upper west coast. The car then traveling in was stopped on the road by a blinding white light. Casey's father was frozen at the wheel, holding the steering wheel, and four small gray cartoon-like creatures, as my husband referred to them, came to the car and took him from the car as a child in their arms. He could feel their reality, the flesh beneath the coverings. Carried him in their arms to a small craft, and then he was taken along with them to a much, much larger craft where he was given into the care of a being who did examinations and other particular things with him. And this creature was not like the little cartoon characters. This creature was larger, deeply wrinkled skin, and almost insectoid-like features. And as this creature, which my husband refers to as the old one, I think it's sort of similar to a Strieber's woman or female that Dave was talking about earlier. As this being held him, he was allowed to touch the mouth of this creature. This was not the little slit line that never moves as we see on the faces of the graves. This was a large oval opening. And inside of this, he was able to feel very soft, spongy-like structures in the place of teeth, which he later perceived as some sort of filtering device. These creatures apparently did use their mouths for something. And he had other encounters throughout his childhood, as so many of the abductees do. And I think the culminating events of childhood experiences in Casey occurred at the ages of 12 and 13 in Kansas. In the first one, he was implanted with a device of some sort inserted through his left nostril, and he felt the pain and the pressure when it was penetrated into the frontal brain area. In the second, he was forced, when he was paralyzed and unable to do anything about it, to have a sexual encounter with an unusual female being. She had whiskey white hair, dark eyes, and somewhat more humanoid features than any of the other creatures that he had seen up to this point. In the background, watching this, was the old one. This has recurred in several instances. Whatever has gone on, the old one has been there as part of this, observing or participating. My experiences also began in childhood. I remember suddenly finding myself outside in the dark one night, which is not something a 5-year-old is often able to get away with. At the age of 5 or 6, somewhere between there, standing beside a very tall creature, at least from my perspective, it was a tall creature, that I thought looked like a gigantic grasshopper or praying mantis. It was holding my hand and telling me that it was my mother. And all I remember consciously, and have always remembered consciously, was screaming and crying and saying, "No, you're not. No, you're not." After that, the memory of that encounter is blank. But the incident stayed in my conscious memory for years. I tried to call it a nightmare, and I did have nightmares about it recurrently in childhood. But that first night, I knew I was awake, I knew I was outside, and then this being was beside me. Without going into all of the details of the experiences my family and my friends and I have been through, which I will have a chance to look at in the book, I would like to talk about a couple of events that are not in the material in the book. And one reason is they were not brought to my attention until after the manuscript was finished. These occurred in my early 20s. And to anyone not acquainted, I'd like to make this statement before we begin. To anyone not acquainted with the abduction scenario, these incidents may appear to have nothing to do with UFOs or ETs, but given the totality of the experiences that I and many others have had, I believe that these are related directly to this experience. And to this day, I have absolutely no memory of these things happening. My family and my friends, however, recall them very clearly. I have their words to go on, not my own memories. On 2 different occasions, 4 friends, who I'm still friends with since those days, tell me that I came to see them in hysterics because I couldn't remember where I had been for a large stretch of time. One was for half a day, and another time was for 24 hours. I was very, very upset, especially because I had a small child, a 3-year-old child at this time, and had no idea where that child was while I was visiting or what was going on with that child. And my husband at that time told me, much, much later, like I said, after I finished the manuscript, that in 1970 I apparently became pregnant. I was on birth control pills. I became pregnant. And 2 months after discovering this, in the middle of the night, something apparently very bizarre happened. I have no memory of this, I just have this account, in which something was done to me that resulted in the bed being so soaked in blood that he destroyed, threw away the sheets on the bed rather than even trying to clean them. That I was in great pain and very hysterical, and he tried his best to get me to go to a hospital. I utterly refused, and I was no longer pregnant after this. I have no memory of this. I believe these accounts. I trust the accounts of these people I've known and lived with for so long. But the trauma, apparently, of his events must have been so great that I pushed them completely out of my consciousness. And this, too, I've found in research happens in many cases. In fact, sometimes the trauma from these early childhood abductions leaves the victims with virtually no conscious memory of several years of their lives. In a couple of recent cases, for example, 2 people that we have begun working with, neither can remember anything before the age of 8 years old. There is no sign of sexual abuse in these situations, if you were thinking about that automatically, which I know does come up. When they look at family photographs of themselves and their family members from these years, they say it means nothing to them. They say it's like looking at photos of someone else's life, not theirs. And of course, there were other inexplicable incidents throughout both of our lives, of which we had some conscious memories, but no understanding. And then in December of 1987, our relationship with these beings apparently changed. My husband was abducted half a block from the house we lived in North Texas. A deep incision was made. It's a very, very bizarre setting, by the way, and I went into detail in the book about this. It's not your typical abduction scene. A deep incision was made into his upper thigh, and he was told by his abductors it was time to remember. You're going to remember now, they told him. Well, it took 5 months for those memories to surface. And up to that point, we never knew what was behind all these odd things we've been through our lives. But now we were beginning to learn something about what we were dealing with. And the knowledge, frankly, was reality-shattering, as I'm sure some of you out there can sympathize with. We had never read anything about UFOs other than the occasional headlines in the papers. I remember the Pascagoula incident, for instance. I remember in 1965 or 66 when there were a lot of reports in the media about sightings. Apparently there was a flat going on at that time. But we rapidly educated ourselves on this subject and eventually were able to take advantage of a good investigator. It did involve some hypnosis. Some of the things were not recalled through hypnosis. Some of them were enhanced. Some of them we were totally unaware of surfaced through hypnosis. And that investigation prompted me to start keeping a journal. I'm a writer, I'm a teacher. This is the sort of thing we do. As a researcher, you keep your data. Originally, this journal was just for our experiences. I soon had to expand it to include those of my son, my daughter-in-law, and several friends because this thing apparently exploded. in our small group. And that journal is the basis for the book that Ellen told you about, Into the Fringe, covering about a year of our experiences, the first year of our knowledge of these. I hope you had a chance to look at it. And the stories that emerged as we began investigating this were frankly just unacceptable to us. As I told you, my husband is in computers. He has a very, very responsible job. He is one of the best in his field. If this were to be known to the people who entrust him with the care of millions of dollars worth of material on a daily basis, we were very afraid of what might happen to our income. I was a college teacher, English and literature, and these were the things that mattered. These were the things we knew about. This was a shock. We could not accept it in the beginning. We fought very hard, in fact, to discredit these accounts of our own because this was not the world we'd always known. There was no room for these things. Now, a therapist who's worked with some abduction cases told me recently that in these experiences, we go through certain stages of emotional responses, and that there is a stage in which abductees grieve for reality, just as a mourner grieves for the loss of a loved one. And we loved our world. We were happy, productive, integrated people. The world that we had always known was the world we loved, and it had been taken away from us permanently. You can't unknow this material. There is a loose pattern of responses to the abduction situation, and I would really like to say how much I appreciate being able to follow Mr. Conroy's talk, because many of the things that you pointed out in your own experiences and others, of course, we run into over and over and over again. So coming from two different places, we're seeing many of the same things. Now, typically, we first try to explain the events away. There's got to be a rational explanation, even if that is, we must be crazy, so therefore we can be cured and we can go back to the world we knew. And then we become frightened when the explanations don't work. The next reaction usually goes one of two ways. Either there's a reaction of anger or a reaction of almost religious awe involved, depending upon the particular nature of the events the abductee recalls. In almost all cases, I believe I'm safe in saying, there's a desire to widen our learning. This desire increases, frequently focusing on a range of topics from the metaphysical and the paranormal to physics and mathematics. Another typical response is withdrawing from close friends and families, at least for a while, because it's very, very difficult to tell these people whom we love and whom we depend upon for support that aliens have been coming into our bedrooms at night. Rejection that we get and the lack of faith these people surely have in us, and that we fear they will have in us, it is devastating. And so many of us quit taking the chance, or we don't take the chance for a long while. And it's equally hard for us to be around these people we love and keep quiet about these events in our lives. Our silence is like lying about something very, very important. So there is a withdrawal, a separation from these people for a great deal of the time. And I'd like to say congratulations to Ellen and the MUFON group here that put together, and Jean who put together the abduction support group, because frankly, sometimes the only place we feel completely comfortable, open, and honest is with others who've been through these experiences. We need those times. People who we know from their own experience do not doubt ours. This is important. We have enough self-doubt as it is. So I applaud your efforts in the Austin area to do this for people. The reason that we have self-doubts is because of the elusive nature of the alien abduction phenomenon. When we're taken, our state of mind is normally so altered that these events have a dreamlike or a surreal quality. Even when there's physical evidence or corroborating witnesses to support them, that support the fact that the abduction experience has occurred, we still cannot put it in the same reality with this. Now, some researchers have noted that this surreal quality is so consistent that it may well be deliberate rather than a mere byproduct of some of the abduction mechanisms that we don't understand. That it may be designed this way, perhaps to teach us something about the nature of reality, or perhaps to deter us from any absolute belief in the reality of the abductions ourselves. And I think there's a reason behind this. If we don't completely believe that such things actually are occurring, we aren't very likely to work on ways to alter, change, or stop this phenomenon. You don't put your energy into things you're not certain are real. The more tentative the reality, the more passively we react. And this isn't true of at least some part of our government, I would like to point out. On some of the portion of the government, and God knows we have been trying to pin down what portion that may be, and we're having very little luck with it, but it's a definitely human and powerful part. The research has shown that there is an active involvement. You know the Freedom of Information Act history. You know the researchers who look into the cover-up. They are interested. They're very interested. And several abductees know this only too well because not only have they been abducted by these aliens, whatever they are, they've also been, and I'll put it very politely, detained by very human sources with clear ties to the military in most of the cases, and have been questioned about the UFOs, the ETs, and our relationships to them, what we know about them. They've also been threatened by these human agents if we do not present the information they're asking for. It's not widely common, but it is reported in multiple instances. Many abductees also experience some symptom of an apparently human agency's interest in them. You're familiar from, I know Ed has at least had this, you've got the phone interruptions, the strange goings-on with the phone that weren't there when you talk about swapping recipes with Mom, or the show you saw last week, but only when you're on the subject of UFOs. Tampered mail, again, only UFO-related mail. I've tried to talk to the post office about this. It's a waste of time. Helicopters over the houses are following the cars over and over and over again. We too, and I don't want to top your story, Ed, when you had the two helicopters like egg beaters. I had just said right before you brought this up that I have on video 3 of them doing the same thing. We've had as many as 9 in one day, and they seem to like to come in clumps of 3. 3 different times, 3 of 3 different times in one day over a house we had lived in for 5 years before this, where there had never been a helicopter over the house. We've had them after midnight. We've had every window in the house rattled by them. They're so low we think they're landing. This may be ET related, it may be some other dimensionality and manifesting in a strange way, or it may be a very human agency behind this. We've also been followed several times, and again, from UFO-related meetings. Well, so far I've tried to tell you a little bit of what it feels like from the inside of going through these experiences. The emotional impact leaves people with altered perceptions of reality, there's no doubt of that. It changes personal relationships. It brings about self-doubt. It brings about a quest for greater knowledge and understanding. These are all very typical responses to what it's like to go through this. And these are all things that we know from having been through them. But I moved from being an abductee, looking at my own material, to working with other cases. I feel like there's nothing more important that I can do than to help other people not feel as lost and helpless and afraid as we did in the beginning. This is important to me. It's the reason I no longer teach, and I work full-time with abduction research. As a researcher, I've discovered another body of knowledge or information which comes from the correlation of events reported by many other abductees. And I think this is even more important than letting me know what it's like to go through the experience, because one person's experience is always going to be a partial picture of this phenomenon. Many people's experiences bring new patterns. And this is the point at which I would advise those with young children to think carefully about keeping them in the room. If you're interested in this phenomenon, you've probably read the Strieber books, David Jacobs, Edith Fiore, Bud Hopkins, Ray Fowler, etc., who dealt with specific cases of abduction. Just to name a few, there are others. And all of these report on some aspects of the phenomenon. But I believe the material I want to present to you tonight is not as familiar, not as available. Frankly, I wonder if the researchers who are running into these similar reports are simply afraid to present it. It's as if, yes, we'll accept lights in the sky, yes, we'll accept craft on the ground, we'll accept grays in the bedrooms, heck, we'll even accept implants and breeding research. But we can't accept the rest of it, even though it's as valid in the report as these other things. Don't push your audience too far. Well, I may be pushing my audience a little far tonight, but I think it's important to balance the picture. There is not just the data you've read about. There is other data equally. If this data is valid, so is what I'm going to give you now. If this first data is not valid, then I'm not claiming any more validity to what I will be telling you about tonight. Now let me say before I start that my own ET experiences have not all been frightening or traumatic. I don't make that claim at all. In fact, the most consciously recalled experience I had back in 1980 was exceedingly a very positive experience. I've never found anything otherwise to suggest that it wasn't. My husband has not been particularly traumatized. I mean, an implant is painful, but you get over it. The sexual encounter was so bizarre as to be just pushed away and does not seem to have affected him for a lifelong processes. So these are not things I'm going to tell you that happened to us. They're things that are reported in multiple cases by others. This is not meant to be a complete picture, but it's meant to widen the complete picture. So please do not accuse me of having said everything that happens in these abductions is terrible or negative or frightening. I'm not saying that. But I think you have ample access to the other side of the picture already. You've read about the positive encounters, the spiritually enlightened exchanges between humans and aliens. These things are out there already. What's not out there is what I want to bring you tonight. Well, some of it's out there, but not in any great detail. I've listed for you 20 points that are correlated from multiple reports. In no instance am I going to be telling you anything that's reported by only 1 or 2 or 3 people out of the over 400 that have worked. The crew from Channel 36 could film these things happening. That kind of reality I'm not saying, but a reality. Now here are some of the things abductees are reporting. And in putting this material together, I've tried to be very careful to draw these from mainly or mostly virgin cases. And that means reports from people who are not at all familiar with ufology, who haven't read the books, attended the conferences, and had no interest in UFOs. They couldn't tell you who Bud Hopkins or Jacques Vallée or Whitley Strieber are. There's no evidence in investigations and material I'm bringing you that these people are lying or that they're mentally disturbed. They're functioning quite well through their lives. There's often corroborating evidence, corroborating witnesses, and the same details turn up time and time again. Multiple reports are at least the beginning of a pattern, and all this data does come from multiple unrelated reports. So I'm just simply going to go down a list of 20 points that I don't think you may be very familiar with from the research, and I'll try to give you some instances as I can along the way. Number 1, aliens can alter our perception of our surroundings. In one case, for instance, 3 women traveling through an isolated part of New Mexico thought they stopped at a red out gas station. A very bizarre abduction occurred at that point. And later, when my husband and I went to this area to check out the gas station, of course, no such thing existed. 2, aliens can control what we think we see. They can appear to us in a number of guises and shapes. And you may have read about some of these cases in which the screen of the beginning and onset of an abduction may involve some animal, a familiar animal in an unfamiliar place, an owl, a deer, a monkey, a rabbit. We also have reports where the ETs presented themselves as a dead relative, the Pope, a celebrity figure, even as Jesus. Number 3, aliens can take us, that is our consciousness. Now remember, I'm reporting, I'm not claiming. They can take us out of our physical bodies, disable our control of our bodies, install one of their own entities in it, and use our bodies as vehicles for their own activities. In one particular instance, a woman was abducted on her way to work one morning. She felt herself, her complete self, on a craft, and she was shown through some sort of viewing device that her body had gone on to work and was functioning quite well, answering phones, making appointments, and so on. And the message seemed to be that you are not your body. Perhaps that's the point. The message also came across quite clearly: we can do with your body as we will. Fourth point, aliens can be present with us in an invisible state or make themselves only partially visible if it suits their purposes. One man was repeatedly visited by an entity that was usually only a dim, formless shape, perhaps just a voice, perhaps a ball of light from which the voice came, but sometimes it took the form of a woman's head. And on one occasion, it manifested the head and two hands because the entity was presenting objects it wanted the abductee to examine. Nobody to go with the head and hands. Number 5, abductees are often left with physical marks after their encounters, and you're probably familiar with the straight line cuts and the scoop marks. I think that's fairly apparent in the literature, especially with Bud's work. But there are many other marks, such as certain patterns of bruises in particular areas of the body time and time again, as if people had been forcibly clamped or carried with great strength in these certain areas. There are discolored circles, claw marks, scratches, and punctures, single and multiple, and very, very often these marks form triangular patterns on the bodies of the abductees. Number 6, female abductees often suffer from gynecological problems in a greater percentage than the normal populace. There's so many instances I can't really draw on one to give you, but we have lost pregnancies, as you know, breast cancer time and time again. Hysterectomies are very, very frequent, if not the endometriosis, the fibrocystic tumors, etc. Number 7, aliens show a great interest in human body fluids. They take samples from the neck, from the spine, from the blood veins, the knee joints, and the wrists. They also inject unknown substances into many of these areas. 8, a surprising number of abductees suffer from serious illnesses that they didn't have before at least some of their encounters. In some cases, these have led to surgery, long-term debilitation, and even death from causes that the doctors cannot identify. One particular abductee, a wealthy man of excellent, robust health, experienced a number of sightings and encounters on his property in Colorado. And he went from being this healthy, robust, active man. In a matter of 2 months, he was dead from a disease. The doctors tried to identify, well, they said that it was a form of cancer. They thought it was a form of cancer so rare that in all the medical literature, less than a dozen cases had ever been reported. And there was no treatment for it, and it was rapid. When they autopsied the man after his death, however, they found something that didn't fit even this rare form of cancer. The leg bone had been scooped out in many, many areas, and these scoops were filled with some blue liquid that they could not identify. Number 9, after encounters, some abductees experience a degeneration of their mental, social, and spiritual well-being. Excessive behavior frequently erupts. There's drug and alcohol abuse, overeating, promiscuity, suicidal depressions that people did not have beforehand. And often strange obsessions develop, and these cause the disruption of the person's normal life and the destruction of personal relationships. 10. Aliens show a great interest in sexual relations with both adults and children. We have reports of intercourse forced on a child as young as 10 years old in our reported cases. And in one house where several family members had been experiencing abductions, the mother noticed one morning her 4-year-old and 6-year-old daughters examine each other's genitals. When she asked why they were doing this, the oldest one replied that that was what the little doctors did when they came and took them from their rooms at night. 11. Abductees recall being instructed and trained by their alien abductors. Now, this training may be in the form of abstract lessons, philosophy, mathematics, physics, spirituality. It may be actual hands-on training with operating alien craft or other forms of technology aboard these craft or in the facilities they're taken to, and in many cases have reported being shown how to fly the crafts that they're in. Several had told of being taken to computer-like consoles, sitting down and going to work. One person said, I punched in my code and began working. 12. Abductees report being taken to facilities in which they encounter not only the non-human beings, but also very normal-looking humans, sometimes in military uniforms, sometimes in lab coats, working with the aliens. Very often the setting is, or seems to be, a scientific laboratory of some sort. One abductee was taken with his roommate to an underground facility that looked like a lab where both humans and non-humans were working, and they were both given injections of some sort. Humans, as I said, working alongside the aliens, and the abductees were told that this was a joint human-alien project to research disease control. One of those gentlemen is now dead after being threatened by these abductors. 13. Abductees report several types of alien beings, and not just the well-known phrase, as you're probably aware of. They report abductions by large insectoid beings, reptilian beings, and human-looking beings, not just your blonde human-looking beings, but human-looking beings with a dark hair growing very often in a widow's peak hairline. Many, many times they report, many times, in fact I can't think of very many cases where this isn't true, seeing two or more of these physically different sorts of beings working in conjunction. Every possible combination is turned up. We have blondes working with reptilians. We have insectoids working with the widow's peak dark-haired humans. We have reptilians with insectoids. And the typical gray beings with all of the above. And some people theorize that one type of being may be benevolent and another may be malicious. But the reports show that all the types work together. 14. Abductees report being scoffed at, jeered at, and threatened by the aliens who intruded to their lives. One woman was shown a very grisly scene. This is a farm woman in the Midwest. A very grisly scene in which aliens were draining human bodies of blood and then dismembering the bodies. She was told that if she didn't cooperate with the aliens, her grandson, whom she was raising, would end up in that condition in that facility. And these are not terribly uncommon threats. And 15, this brings me to a point that will be very difficult for some of you to accept, and I only ask that you listen to it. I'm simply reporting, I'm not creating, and I'm not advocating. It has to be considered, however, because it turns up so often. Abductees, virgin cases who know absolutely nothing about John Lear, Bill Cooper, or any of that material, haven't heard of this. Recall and report being taken to underground facilities where they have seen grotesque and seemingly impossible hybrid creatures and vats of colored liquid, just like you've read about in the most grisly and abhorrent and rejected of all the UFO stories. Vats of colored liquid fill parts of human bodies. We have reports of humans being drained of blood, as I told you earlier, being mutilated, flayed, decapitated, and dismembered in areas where these lifeless human bodies are stacked like so many cords of firewood. Again, let me remind you, I made no absolute claims on the reality of the reports, but they are coming from cases as valid as those who have seen the golden bronze, who have had elevated experiences, and sometimes the same case has both. 16. Aliens come into homes and take away young children, leaving the distraught parents paralyzed and helpless to intervene. And whenever a parent reports that he has been able, or she has been able to raise some sort of protest, the aliens insist that the children belong to the aliens, not to the humans. 17, and similarly, the aliens often start an indoctrination program very early in the abduction phenomenon, telling children that they, the aliens, are their true parents, not those humans they left back in the house. And this is, for example, what happened to me at age 5. That beings insisted it was my mother. I insisted it was not. Maybe I'm stubborn a little more than usual. They often tell adult abductees that their own children don't belong to them. These are our children. They belong to me. It's reported over and over. We all seem to just predict the same sentences coming from the abducted parents who are telling what they have seen happen to the children. Now, sometimes the aliens will introduce a figure, usually very human-looking, very, very attractive, dressed in splendid robes and crowns, glowing, which they call the king or the father. And this figure is very impressive, very awe-inspiring to the abductees who encounter this being. Again, there is this indoctrination that we belong to them. 18. Aliens perform extremely painful procedures at times on abductees, saying that it is necessary, but they give no explanation why it's necessary. For instance, abductees have had the eyes removed from the sockets, where material has been scraped away or something has been implanted before the eye is put back in. And certainly this is humanly possible. We do it all the time in surgery. It's not a trick, but it's one of the things they do without anesthetic in many cases. Sometimes the abductee is subjected to painful constrictions around the head, the chest, or the extremities. They report seeing other humans, apparently other abductees, undergoing skull, chest, and groin incisions of sorts that our doctors do not do. And abductees are frequently forced to endure painful anal probes, as well as genital penetrations, and this includes, in our research, cases on children as young as 5 years old. 19. In some recent cases, we've gotten reports in which abductees, and this is very new, we're still trying to see what other correlations may come up with this material. Abductees report being shown how these gray beings, the ones that so many people are very familiar with, that many people only encounter, the Zeta Reticulans, whatever you want to call them, are not aliens. They are manufactured beings, and they've said this to several cases, and you've probably read about this. They are manufactured beings serving as a labor force with limited capabilities, and that these grays are produced from completely human material, most especially from the fetuses, sperm, and the ova that are taken time and time and time and time again. They've taken enough material, if it was reproductive, they could have populated the solar system. They're still taking it. So it may be that this most familiar of the alien life forms is not alien at all. We're working on that right now. It's tentative, but it is turning up in many cases, not many, but in a few cases, and we're working with many more. We don't know what else may turn into this to go along with this. The final point, the aliens make frightening predictions of an imminent time of global chaos and destruction. Has anybody here heard this before? Okay. They say that a certain number of humans, and this number varies from case to case, sometimes 12,000, sometimes several million. It's up for grabs. They seem to not know how to keep their stories consistent. That a certain number of humans will be rescued from this planet in order to continue the human species, either on another world, on another level of dimension, or back on this world after the destruction or the cleansing, the purification, whatever spiritual term you want to put on it, has been accomplished. Now, some abductees who've been told this and who've gone through some of these other things we've been talking about don't believe this story. They feel there's a much more sinister person behind this so-called human rescue effort. And the problem is these sinister feelings, these questions that the abductees have are very consistent from totally unrelated cases. I'll leave it to your imagination because I certainly can't tell you what the obverse of a human rescue might be. Now, I could continue. There are other anomalous reports, but I think these will show you some of what we are finding. Something that is contrary in some ways to what a few researchers would have you believe, that the abduction experience is limited to a set pattern. We know from the cases it's not limited to a physical exam merely or to an alleged crossbreeding experimentation. Some of these things have nothing to do with either of those approaches. Abductees are not merely undergoing objective, scientific-minded experiments or encountering only spiritually enlightened beings whose actions have our best interests at heart. There is that reported, and there is this reported. Now, looking at a large body of data, it's clear to me, at least, that something else is going on, something not quite as simple as the patterns we've read about up to now would have us believe. In my opinion, at least in these cases, we're dealing with something far more painful, in many cases more terrifying. It's going on in many encounter cases. And I think we have to ask ourselves, what does this mean? What's the implication? For our children, ourselves, our world, our future? Now finally, this has just been a report. Now I would like to share with you some personal thoughts. And I don't offer them as facts, and I don't insist anybody accept them, but I hope you'll at least listen to them and try to think about them with an open mind. Put it in a big pot with everything else about the abduction phenomena that you are learning about. These are personal gripes or personal points in a way. There's a theory current in ufology right now that says abductees who perceive their experiences as negative only do so because they themselves aren't spiritually or psychically advanced. Persons with higher cosmic development have positive alien encounters. That's what the theory says. And those who recall painful, frightening, or sinister events are merely spiritual Neanderthals. Now, the reason the researchers tell us that this is true is because the aliens serve as mirrors of our own individual natures. Now, Strieber, thank you, Mr. Conway again, has voiced this theory very clearly in the book Majestic, where he says, quote, "In the eyes of the others, we who met them saw ourselves, and there were demons there." They're just showing us our own demonic nature, our own lack of spirituality. Now, having known so many intelligent, moral, positively oriented, religious people who go through these abduction experiences, I believe the theory is wrong. And in my view, it's worse than merely wrong. It's despicable. It's as twisted as blaming a rape victim for the violence committed against her. This attitude, this very supercilious attitude on the part of some theorizers about the abduction phenomenon, leaves many abductees feeling doubly victimized. First by the ETs, and then by that part of the UFO community that condemns them for having been hurt or having been frightened by what those spiritually evolved among us claim to be wonderful space brothers, here to save us from ourselves. I believe there are a couple of reasons why this theory may be so appealing, as much as I dislike it. I understand, I think, the motivation behind it. And first off, I think that most humans have a deep need to believe in the good because of our own essentially moral nature. We have always professed to prefer good to evil. And even those among us who fall a little short of perfection, we still admire, or we still are drawn to those who manifest goodness. Most religions teach that God, the good force, is mightier than evil, whatever form that evil may take. So we tend to think, by analogy, that if a being is farther along in some evolutionary stage than we are, it must be more spiritually enlightened. Second, I think we need desperately for these aliens to be benevolent because we feel so helpless against them. They seem to control events totally during abductions. And I think it's really too terrifying to think that they might deliberately hurt us or be evilly intentioned toward us because we can do nothing to stop them. We know our own weaknesses fairly well, and we need, I think, for some superior force to offer us a hope of salvation, personally and globally, because we're pretty much watching the world around us slowly, if not less than slowly, disintegrate. And furthermore, I believe that the aliens know our psychology very well. There are those who would excuse the pain, the trauma, and so on that they inflict upon us because they don't understand us. Well, I don't buy that for a minute. They understand us very, very well. The manipulation of our minds shows us that. They are able to manipulate our desire for goodness and our fear of their superiority into what they hope will be an unquestioning acceptance of whatever they say, whatever they tell us, or whatever they do to us. And after all, what better way is there to gain cooperation than to tell us that these things are for our own good, to convince us we're going to benefit. Suffer now, benefit later. But when we look at all the data, at the actions of these beings, and the results, the fruits of their labor, this alien interference into human minds, I think there's a great discrepancy between their words and their deeds. And I believe that at the core of the human and alien interaction, there is a clear pattern of deception. They deceive us in their appearances. They deceive us about our own experiences by covering up abductions with screen memories, false memories, and amnesia. And this much I think anyone out there who's familiar with the abduction phenomenon will accept. This is deception. Call it what you will. We are deceived in these ways. But I think there's another screen, another deceptive technique being employed, which at least I have only recently come to grasp and understand from these cases. And its implications, if proven to be true at some future point, will seriously challenge most of the abduction research that's been done up to now. I'll try to explain by tracing out this process of investigation that usually follows an abduction event. All right, knowing that something unusual has happened, you have a missing time episode, you have a light, you have something in the yard, or you have scars, etc. A person will seek out eventually a researcher, an investigator. What is consciously available is explored, what is physically confirming is explored, and in some cases then, because there is a block of memory missing, the person will seek hypnotic regressions to uncover this amnesia period. And what emerges under hypnosis is the memory of a typical abduction scenario, hitherto unremembered by the person, such as a physical exam, the taking of reproductive material, the delivery of some spiritually enlightened message, or a warning about an upcoming cataclysm, or telling the person that he's been chosen for some important mission. The person didn't remember this consciously, goes through hypnosis, and this story emerges. And the researcher and the abductee, having penetrated that amnesia, hear this account and come away from the session satisfied they've discovered the truth about the experience. The less threatening this discovered material, the more benevolent the hypnotically recalled events seem, the more satisfied are the investigator and the abductee. It wasn't so bad now, was it? These beings are our friends, after all, or at least they're not our enemies, and everyone goes away with a sense of relief. But it's now apparent from several recent cases that these recovered memories may be false. They may well yet be another screen, masking events that are much more reprehensible in what is recalled under hypnosis. And I'll use one case. I'll call Lisa to explain this to you. 15 years ago, while driving in Southern California alone, Lisa experienced a long episode of missing time. When she came back to normal awareness, she was in a different town, miles and miles from where she'd been when it started. She was totally lost, and she was crying hysterically. She felt very frightened and very abandoned, and she had no idea what had happened in the last 2 hours or how she got from one town to the other. Eventually, the memory faded. In the past few years, other events began to crop up, and this made her search back in the investigation of these recent memories back to other odd things, and that brought us to this missing time episode. She chose hypnosis to try to fill in the gap of those missing 2 hours, and she regressed to that old experience and remembered a series of events involving her abduction from her car into a spacecraft occupied by typical grays. Lisa recalled being introduced to a human-looking being with dark hair and little peak pattern, with very, very penetrating, mesmerizing eyes, dressed in a long robe, wearing a crown on his head. She was told that he was her father and the father. And Lisa was in awe. The love, the religious response, the tears in her eyes as she relived this moment was truly genuine for Lisa. She was in the presence of something holy, something spiritual, something that she was related to. She was then taken into an auditorium-like environment where there were many grays, sort of seated like you are now, a podium sort of like I'm at here. And on this podium was a book. And Lisa was told she should read this book to her audience. She opened the book, and there were strange symbols in blue on these pages. She had no idea what they meant, and she tried to tell them she couldn't read this book. Well, they told her to touch each symbol with her hand, and that the meaning of the symbol would automatically come to her, and so she did this. And each time she touched a symbol with her hand, she received a message she told to the grays in the audience about some particular moral or spiritual message. All in very general terms, by the way. And Lisa felt very pleased with her own performance. She said she could sense a lot of love and acceptance from these grays who were listening to her. The next thing, however, that she remembered was being back in her car, lost and crying hysterically. Now, I think most researchers and most abductees would have stopped the session at that point, satisfied at least that the majority of the experience had been recalled, the amnesia had been lifted, and the truth recovered. But the particular hypnotist working with Lisa at this time was puzzled by something and decided to probe a little bit further. The experience had nothing frightening about it, as Lisa reported it. It was spiritually uplifting. It was awe-inspiring. She felt this religious awe in the presence of this resplendent father figure, and she had read morally uplifting material for her book to this audience that loved her back. But why, then, the hypnotist wondered, was Lisa so distraught when she returned to her car? Lisa's emotional condition didn't match up with the reported experience. So the hypnotist asked Lisa to go back to just before the return to the car, backtrack just a little bit. She programmed Lisa to recall only the truth with clarity, to penetrate any remaining screens or blocks. When Lisa did this, she saw herself suspended in an encircling tube of colored light. She was naked and she was paralyzed. Instead of grays being around her with the dark-haired, well, she did see the dark-haired person in this also, but she saw a group of reptilian creatures surrounding her, and the dark-haired being the father standing off to one side and observing. Now, at first she said that the reptilian beings sort of poked and prodded at her body. They used like the fluoroscope and the x-ray to look at the parts while she's hanging there. She didn't want to see anything to her body. As if they're going through some anatomy class like we might do in medical school. Poking and prodding and talking about parts of her body. It was bad enough for her to see herself exposed like this and helpless like this. But then she was removed from the tube of light. She was put on a slanted vertical table of some sort, and she was restrained upon that table. One of the reptilian beings who had been examining her came up to her and began a sex act with her. She was very terrified. She began crying out mentally because she couldn't do it physically, crying out to God and to Jesus, in whom she has deep religious faith, to make this stop, to not let her be raped. But the being continued to rape her, and then a second one did the same thing, and then a third one, and then a fourth. Lisa felt all the pain and all the shame of rape, and she also felt abandoned by her God. These were the feelings that she had when she was returned to the car, and that's why she was in such hysterics and feeling so abandoned. And for years afterwards, her sexuality was repressed, there was problems with this, and she had no idea consciously why, after that point, everything about her sexuality seemed to change. At least this is just one case out of several recent investigations in which the initially recalled memories under hypnosis appear quite benevolent, quite uplifting. But they seem to be acting as a screen or cover for something very different going on underneath at some other level of reality. Now, the debate about aliens' ultimate motivations is an ongoing debate. Are they here to help us? Are they using us to crossbreed, to regenerate their own species, or to produce some new kind of species from the two of us? Are they here to elevate our psychic awareness? Are they planning to rescue us from the coming destruction? These are questions we hear asked a lot dealing with the abduction phenomenon and ET phenomena in general. And in trying to answer these questions, I would just caution us to consider all the data. Any theory that doesn't account for all the data cannot be valid. We may want to trust that the aliens are benevolent. I know I do want to trust this. We may believe they're spiritually superior to us, but I think we have to be very cautious. I put it this way to myself. Do angels have to come in the dark and deceive and paralyze us? I think that's a valid question. Do angels need to steal fetuses? Do they need to manipulate our genitals and probe our rectums? Do they have to terrorize our children? Do they have to inflict great pain upon us? Is deception consistent with high spiritual motives? And if so, I would like to understand how. A Native American spiritual leader who resides not too far from this area, in fact, was recently asked at a retreat to discuss what she thought was going on with UFOs and with ETs. She replied that there are several races, from her understanding from the tradition of the Native American, that there are several races of beings currently on this planet, that some of them have good motivations and some of them do not. She said we should not think of them as perfect or spiritual beings because they were restricted and physical just as we are, carrying out their own agenda that has nothing to do with the benefit of mankind. Now, I think we would be wise to listen to her words, and I would very much like to thank you for listening to mine. Oh my.
You don't know what to ask for.
Pardon, you don't know what to ask?
What can we say?
Well, either I did a terribly good job or a terrible job, so. I'm aware that some people doing research that's been published have come across some of these details. And I don't know, I think we're all doing abduction research in it since it's parallel, but I don't know why we're not getting more reports. We hear them off record. We don't find them in the record. Yes.
In a closing statement, you caution to look at all of the, and as I remember what I heard, I don't remember hearing a great deal of information that pointed to specific experiences that were positive, that left specific positive outcomes.
Well, the reason I didn't do that, you're right, I didn't because that's already out there. That's available. I wasn't trying to give the whole picture, I was trying to widen the picture. That's already available. You can find it in ample publications and ample reports. I'm trying to bring the part that we don't find so often. I'm not saying that's all of it, it's just a part we're not very familiar with.
I would be a little behind to know where some of that information that is available.
That's positive?
Yeah.
Oh, there's all sorts of channeled material that's very positively oriented. There are cases like Lisa's that look at hypnosis and come out with a spiritually uplifting scenario. These are reported many times. Betty Andresen's material, for one, comes to mind. This is available. This other material I've tried to talk about tonight is just not as available, and I'm simply trying to balance the picture a little bit.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, and look and make that comment, I really wanted to be able to say, okay, I'm willing to know, and I'd like to see.
Well, I think you'll find that positive data is out there. You just do a scan of the literature. There's a lot of it. Yes.
There seems to be an obvious fact that there's dualistic influences here because you have on the one hand crop circles, you have on the other hand calendar.
Right.
One brings forth beauty and aesthetic, another.
You know, I've thought about this, and this duality has always bothered me. I wonder, and I'm trying to phrase the question in an aggressive way for myself. Would an essentially benevolent force, even, and for one thing, let me back up a minute. These things may be imagined experiences. They may be scenes and experiences that are deliberately put into our minds that we never really saw or went through. So I asked myself, and that may be on both the positive and negative side, would an essentially benevolent source need to give us these grisly experiences? Why? Or would an essentially negative force profit by giving us false positive memories? Which makes the most sense to me? You know, I just ask it on human logic, and that's all I've got.
I'd like to speak to this remark about the relation pattern. There's a book called Out There by Howard Flow. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's a very excellent book. And in that book, he documents information that indicates that the CIA that they were done in order to throw off UFO investigators and have UFO investigators follow those lines rather than digital operations.
The two sources for information.
They're very opposing. Right. And we've got to find an explanation that will account for, incorporate all that data, and that's very hard to do right now. It's easier to throw out some of the data and make a theory to fit what we've got left. Yes. Yeah.
You mentioned that these aliens communicate with abductees. What different languages have they been known to communicate?
Normally it's mental, and so it comes in whatever language the person speaks, like telepathy. Uh-huh. Oh, the person in front of you, yeah.
Question one, why do people have to think they are crazy when something strange happens in their lives?
Why? I don't think they have to. I think we would prefer to be told we're crazy rather than we're abductees, because you can treat mental illness
You're not mentally ill and you're not crazy.
We know it. We're functioning on every other facet of our lives just like everyone else, but this doesn't fit reality. We've been taught what reality is. This isn't it. Where's the problem, you know? The woman back behind you, yeah.
Where did you find all these reports where these patterns come from?
This is from a pool of over 400 abduction investigations begun by Barbara Bartlett, and then I joined her research as an assistant, then an associate, and I've now become trained in some of the hypnotic regression techniques. I do it very rarely, but I do it when there's no one else there, the person really wants it. Barbara began, by the way, and I'd like to say this, Barbara began originally in the mid-70s as an assistant in research to Dr. Jacques Vallée, who was investigating cattle mutilations in the Arkansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Kansas area. Some of you may not know that he ever did this research, but he certainly did. And after 7 years of this, he began to change his focus, and Barbara had been drawn through investigating the cattle mutilation cases into realizing the abduction phenomenon was going on also, and she began to do her research in that area. Yeah, Melinda?
Is Barbara a certified hypnotherapist?
No, she is not.
I was thinking that was the case.
Persons who have been through hypnosis with her, I've got to throw this in because I believe in this woman. Persons who've been through hypnosis with her and then with others who are certified will come back to Barbara rather than the other. They've told us, one of your friends has said that in fact to us, that there's no comparison with her insight or intuition that you can't learn. But she was taught by certified hypnotherapists who at first did do the abduction regressions, and then the cases got so large she had to train her.
I would just say that anyone that's going to have any kind of investigative work done with them on a personal level should be working with qualified hypnotherapists.
What is that? What is that? I mean, there is no state licensure,
There are licensed agencies, there are ways to check.
but there is no state license.
What you do is you just ask the person that's working with you.
But what are those credentials and where do they come from?
I will be glad to see you and tell you there's a long list.
I know Barbara was trained by a certified hypnotherapist. She never went through the qualifying certification process, but the man who was doing the work had done it voluntarily. The caseload became so overwhelming he could no longer volunteer his time. He was one of the best certified hypnotherapists in the Tulsa area, and he trained Barbara personally to do this. Her results speak for themselves. I'm not at all worried. I put my son in her hands. I put myself in her hands, and the results have not been something I regretted. Yes, sir.
What percent of the 400 abductees you're talking about were Afro-American?
One of her most extraordinary cases was half black, half Cherokee Indian. An entire family of Afro-Americans in the South Dallas area, a very intelligent, widely spread out family in which there were every generation and relationship had these experiences. 4 new cases in the Oklahoma area, Afro-Americans. The numbers are not 50-50 certainly, but there are a number of cases. Yes, sir.
Do any of your cases draw from the works of Linda Moulton Howe? I'm particularly interested in the mantis sightings.
No, she has turned up parallel material. We've talked about this at some of the conferences, and reptilian, insectoid, and so on are turning up in her cases as well. But these are not her cases. These are ours. Only truth. Ella says it's time for a break, and I thank you very much for your attention.